Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve's Hardware. Today we're going to take a look at the MSI MEG X670E Ace. So basically, this is the latest and greatest from AMD, and we'll be taking a look at this motherboard. We're going to look through accessories, we're going to do an overview, and then later on we're also going to do a teardown of this motherboard and take a look at its circuits and everything. Now, this motherboard is one of the high-end ones for MSI. And it does some cool switching with the PCIe 5.0. You have a PCIe 5.0 M.2, which is actually a requirement of the E series. So let's get started. First of all, to open this box, you just flip it around so you guys get a better view. You have to push in on this and then slide that open. Okay, now we have the motherboard here, and it's pretty heavy. So we're going to take it out and just put it to the side for a second while we take a look at the accessories. Alright. So where to put this box? Just put it right here. Okay. So here are the accessories. You have a bunch of them. Starting up, let's start out and look at this. This is the MSI Gen 5 Dual. This is a dual PCIe 5.0 M.2 adapter card it's an add-in card basically. You take the heatsink off, you install two M.2 drives. PCIe 5.0 also supports PCIe 4.0, PCIe 3.0. So basically M.2 drives as long as they're not, like SATA based. And you can see here that this has basically, it looks like a by 8 link. Yeah, so if you want 2 times 4, you need by 8. And you have a couple cables you're going to need to connect on this, and they're actually included. You have some switches here for the LEDs and the fans, or the fan, so you can control. There are LEDs built into it under here, and they will light up. And you can hook this up to your motherboard. You also need power, extra power for the drives. So this is pretty heavy, nice little addition. This actually brings a total of M.2 slots up to, I believe 6 on this motherboard, if I'm not mistaken, or 5. We'll take a look in a second and I'll let you know. But yeah, so we'll put that aside for a second. Now, additional cables. This is a SM bus connector cable. The motherboard has a header for this, and so does the add-in card. Basically, you need this so the motherboard can trigger the card to take over the slot. So you need this. This goes with the card. Then you have another cable. It's an extension cable. But we have a bunch of extension cables, but it's not this one. Oh, it's this one actually. It was right there. See, it says HDD LED on it. So you plug the HDD LED one in the motherboard, and then you plug the other one into the card, and so you can sync up the 2 sets of HD LEDs. So let's do that. This is actually a really cool thing. You put this on the front panel headers on your motherboard, and then you basically plug these into the jumpers that come out of your case. That way you don't have to plug them directly into the motherboard, which can be really hard after motherboard installation. And this is a pretty big motherboard, so this is a lot easier, and you can like cram all these together and tighten them up if you want. So that's pretty neat. Set that aside. The motherboard does have SATA ports. It has 6 of them. They give you 4 SATA cables. On 2 of them, one is right angled and one is straight. So if you're going in at an angle, these are better. But you have a total of 4 SATA cables. Now, we also have one RGB LED port on this motherboard that's just old RGB. You have like a few addressable RGB headers, but you only have one normal RGB, which just is one color. The addressable are way cooler anyways. But so they give you a splitter with the 1, and it goes to 2, and that's pretty neat, and they're pretty long, so even if you just wanted to extend it, even just use 1, pretty useful. This is a addressable RGB extension cable. I believe this makes it compatible with certain types of strips or devices. It goes from a 3-pin with 4-pin spacing to a 3-pin with like a plug-in type spacing. I think this is more like a Corsair type thing. I think Corsair uses that connector a lot. These are 2 temperature sensors. These are remote temperature sensors. Whew, they get tangled. Well, the good news is that they're really thin, so you can really hide their appearance. Temperature probe here, and then you plug this one into the motherboard. It looks to be about 3 feet long. So yeah, pretty neat. You get 2 of them, and the motherboard comes with 2 headers for such a purpose. These right here I'm not going to open because I know if I open I'm going to be really likely to lose them. These are M.2 toolless standoffs for M.2 slots. This is where your driver DVD went, into a little 16 gigabyte stick, and I believe it's loaded with an ISO, and the ISO you basically run and it basically gives you like a startup disk. Yeah, so that's that. Now, if we go forward, we have a Wi-Fi antenna, and this Wi-Fi antenna is pretty neat. Oh, you also have some stickers, European Union regulatory guide, some stickers for the case cables, and you have this Wi-Fi antenna, which is really easy to put together, not too difficult at all. You basically just slide it in place like that, and then the base is magnetic, and you screw these into the motherboard and you have your Wi-Fi 6E antenna. Yeah, so now put the accessories aside, or I'll lay them all out for you. So Wi-Fi antenna, regulatory and stickers, some M.2 stand-ups, you have your PCIe add-in card for 2 extra M.2 slots, PCIe Gen 5 capable. Extension cable for the front panel headers. USB stick for drivers. And you know what's funny is in the manual it says don't wipe the ISO from this drive to make sure not to delete it, because I mean, unlike a DVD-R or CDR, these are these are rewritable, so you can actually delete it off there by accident. Yeah, but the motherboard doesn't come with a manual, so it's all paperless. Anyways, temperature sensor, oh no, LED extension for this, SM bus connector for this, temperature sensor 1, temperature sensor 2, oof, probably shouldn't have unraveled that. RGB extension 1, RGB extension Y splitter 2, and 4 cables for SATA. Alright, so these are the accessories that come with the motherboard. You don't really need that many accessories with the motherboard these days. This is cool, that's cool. This makes things a lot easier. Temperature sensors are always a cool addition, especially because these are not like jumper sensors. They have like a, you have to plug them into the motherboard. So yeah, and more standoffs. And a USB stick. And you can put it on your keychain. The whole thing is a solid unibody metal design. Anyways, so let's move over to the board. Alright, let's take a look at the motherboard's PCIe layout. We have the CPU socket here. We have the nice, basically, socket hold-down mechanism. Some coolers don't use this. If your cooler has a custom backplate, that's going to be a problem. You might want to get an adapter because the backplate here doesn't come off. However, for most people, like 90% of coolers, 99% of AM4 coolers, this should be fine. But yeah, I put the Corsair H150 Pro RGB in here, or 150i Pro, whatever it's called, on here, and it worked just fine. Anyways, we have M.2 slots here, 2 here, 1 here. These are PCIe 4.0 M.2 slots from the chipset. This right here is a PCIe 5.0 by 4 drive right here. But here's the deal, that expansion card comes so you can actually plug it into one of these. Not all X670E motherboards have PCIe 5.0 in more than one PCIe slot. Having it in one is the base requirement, and having one PCIe Gen 5 slot is also a requirement for M.2 for the E version of the X670 boards. Anyways, but in this case, MSI did something different. Instead of implementing more PCIe 5.0 directly on the board for M.2 slots, they put it into the lanes and they used a bunch of extra hardware to switch it around and redrive it and all that stuff. So you have lanes coming from here. 16x PCIe 5.0 goes here, okay? And then this one switches with this. So this can be by 8 and this can be by 16 or by 8. So you go 8-8 or 16-0 between these two, okay? Or you can go 16-0, 4. Now this is PCIe 5.0 by 4, and it's always by 4. This doesn't switch with anything, but these two switch. So you can go 8-8-4 or 16-0-4, okay? 16-0-4, 8-8-4. So if you have that extra add-in card, MSI's manual actually should suggest you plug it into PCIe /_E2, and that's this slot okay? And that's because that card uses by 8 PCIe 5.0. This is only by 4. So this is for something else, maybe a capture card, something cool like that. And I'm sure there's some PCIe single slotted additional cards too. Anyways, but let's take a look at this first. This is cool. This Lightning Gen 5, you basically, this is toolless. I mean, it's pretty sturdy on the board, and this board is not light. You can press in at the top and move up and then slide out. There's a magnetic connector here, and it has little slits here, and it basically goes into these little slits. So you can put your card in, and then you can put the M.2 slot down, and this little swivel thing right here, and I'll show you later on closer up. You can basically lock your M.2 drive in. You don't need a tool for this. As long as your drive is this long, which most of them are, I mean, and to put it back is pretty simple. You just slide, and then click. And now it's still as sturdy as it was before, okay? And then that should put pressure. And we should mention one more thing. On the back side, I'll show you in a little bit, there are 2 thermal pads that connect just below this and put heat into the back metal panel on the motherboard. Yeah, anyways. Okay, here we have the VRMs here. MSI states that this is a 22 plus 2 plus 1 phase motherboard. You have 22 phases of 90 amp, basically all-in-one power stages. They're probably smart power stages. And basically, they're cooled really well. The inductors and the power stages themselves are cooled by a direct touch heat pipe onto this finned array heatsink. They're using that 7 watt per millikelvin conductivity, thermal conductivity pads. On the back of the motherboard, they're actually like metal slabs that cool the back too, which is neat. They're screwed in. And then you do have 2 extra phases, so you have 22 plus 2 plus 1. The plus 2 is for SoC, and the plus 1 is for miscellaneous. I'm not sure exactly what parts those are yet. We got to tear this thing down, and I'll definitely relay that information later on. You have PCI 5, DDR5 slots here. They're rated for DDR5 6666 plus, so they support pretty high speeds. Sure, you can check a XQVL or qualified vendors list on their website to find compatible kits if you want to go that high. AMD says the sweet spot is 6,000 megahertz, which is, we already ran real easy with this motherboard. So yeah, maybe it'll be easy if we take a look at the M.2 slots for now. So the M.2 slots are pretty nice. We're just going to unscrew this. Okay. And then this. And then, so the only tool part you have to do the M.2 drives if you want to put M.2 PCIe 4.0 drives in here. So that comes off, and then you have, this is a heatsink, and then these have heatsinks on the bottom, and these are toolless. You just turn this, and it does it. It's pretty simple, pretty easy, not too hard to conquer. And then this one comes off as well. Same thing, and this is actually magnetic, so, well, okay, I'll pick up that screw a little bit. But yeah, see, it basically touches this, and there has metal pins inside, because I'm pretty sure this lights up. So, it's like that. And, yeah. Magnetically goes into place, and there are contact pins here, and they contact this here, and I think this lights up. Actually, it does light up if I remember correctly. Anyways, we'll take these off for now. That'll just help us move forward. But yeah, so now that we've taken a look at all this stuff, we're going to zoom in, take a look at the I.O. and stuff like that. Okay, taking a look at the I.O. shield, we have 3 buttons starting from the top down. We have a clear CMOS, then we have a auto recovery, or kind of a one-click recovery BIOS button, where you basically plug in a USB stick into a certain port, hit the button, and it'll update the UEFI BIOS for you. At the bottom, we also have a smart button, and this smart button, it can do a bunch of things. I believe by default it's a reset button, but you can also configure it to change your lighting, boot and safe mode, or actually do something called turbo fan. I assume that just blows your fans at full speed or something. So that's nice. Then you have a vertical Type-C slot. That Type-C port is actually a really handy port, because that Type-C port is a USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, which is 20 gigabits per second. Now, its controller is actually right next to it because it's vertical like that because of a daughter board that sticks into the motherboard and utilizes an ASM chipset to basically provide that port right next to the controller, which basically improves signal integrity, I would think, so you don't have to use redrivers or anything like that, which is nice. You also have another one of those, but this time from the chipset, and it's all the way down here, right? And that one is also 2x2, so it's a USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, but that's from the chipset itself, okay? Now, the other Type-C port, which is like, I believe it's right here, that USB 3.2 port right here, that actually has a little DisplayPort logo next to it because it also can be the video output from the graphics inside the CPU, the integrated one, inside the IOD, which is IO die, which is on package on the CPU itself, because most of these CPUs from AMD for 7 series or 7000 series, they have integrated graphics, and that's the way you get it out. And it also doubles a USB 3.2 Gen 2, which is 10 gigabits per second, as do all of the red ports on the back. All of the red Type A ports are USB 3.2 Gen 2. That means they're all 10 gigabits per second. No USB 3.0 5 gigabits per second here, or as it's called, USB 3.2 Gen 1. So this is all like high-end ports. 10 gigabits per second is nice. Now, that USB-C port down here and the 3 ports above it, those come directly from the CPU, because the CPU does have some I/O in it. And yeah, and the rest all come from the chipset. And yeah, so you have a 10 gigabit NIC network interface controller here. And it can go, it's M-base-T, so it's 10, 5, 2.5, 1, and 100 megabits. The rest are gigabits. Anyways, next to that is Wi-Fi antenna. So you have Wi-Fi 6E. Now this controller is actually from AMD. It's branded AMD Wi-Fi 6E / Bluetooth 5.2. I believe AMD produced it in conjunction with MediaTek. Anyways, the 10 gigabit NIC is from Marvel / Acquainta. I think it's the Acquainta AQC113. It's a common chip that we've seen on actually high-end Z690 boards. So anyways, moving on, here we have the audio section. You see it's a heatsink over it. Now the audio section, it does use an ALC controller, an ALC, I believe 4082, and then it has the ESS DAC. I believe it's the ES92804AQ, and then it also has a dedicated headphone amplifier. Cool. We'll definitely cover this more when we do a teardown. Before we forget, this is a system fan header, just so you keep that in mind. Okay, so when we start this, let's talk about the fan headers. There are a lot on this motherboard. Any system fan header is capable of up to 2 amps. Every other fan header is capable for 3 amps. Yeah, so there are a lot of fan headers. This is just the first one we're going to encounter, and that's a 2 amp system fan header. All system fan headers by default are DC mode. The pump headers and the CPU header, well, the pump headers, there's 2 of them. They're both PWM mode by default and 3 amps. And then the CPU header, the lone one, is auto sensing between DC and PWM mode, and it's 3 amps as well. Anyways, let's flip this around a little bit. We have our audio headers here. We have our RGB header here. Remember in the accessories there was a splitter. That splitter would go here. And so RGB, basically, if the difference between addressable and normal RGB, the entire strip moves as one. Addressable, every individual LED on that strip can move as multiple colors, so, and in multiple fashions. But in the normal RGB strip, it's just like red, and then it can turn to whatever other color, or it can flash or whatever, but all of them are the same color on the strip, or the same intensity, same color on the same strip. But addressable, like we have one here, that you can individually control. So addressable is a little cooler, and addressable is 3-pin with that empty middle one. Okay. Anyways, this here, this is something you probably won't ever use. This little header here is for basically an input to the motherboard if you want to light up everything without the system. It's more for shows and for retailers and stuff. This is a header here for a panel, and like an OC panel or something. It doesn't come with this motherboard, but if you have it from a leftover motherboard, I don't know, maybe it'll work, or I don't know. If you can get your hands on one, that's what that header is for. You got 2 switches here. One will disable all the built-in LEDs into the motherboard easily, like boom, disabled. By default it's enabled. This right here, this other one, that's a BIOS switch. So there's 2 physical BIOS ROMs on this motherboard. Not every motherboard will have that, but when this is working and it's in position 1, that's the main BIOS ROM, and this LED right next to it will light up white, and it's pretty intense. And then if you switch to BIOS 2, it'll go red. Okay? So you can switch between white and red, which is, at least it'll let you know. And then the addressable, like we covered. We have two headers here. One is a pump header. This must be a pump header, and this is a system fan. Remember, pump is by default PWM. They're all hybrid. They can all change between DC and PWM. Just the default mode on system fan headers is DC, and default mode on pumps is PWM. Pumps do 3 amps. System fan headers do 2. 2 is more than enough. This right here next to it, this like 3-pin, is not a fan header. It's actually used for a water flow sensor. Maybe you could plug a fan into it. I don't know. I probably wouldn't try it. These two, remember those little temperature sensors I showed you for external temperature readings? Yep, that's what these two plug into. So they're like 3 feet long. You can reach anywhere on the motherboard. If you have a nice graphics cards, you can, or a nice graphics card, you can always plug them in there, plug it into like the heatsink or something. I don't know, whatever you want, and you can use it as a reference for your case fans. Okay, 2 USB 2.0 headers, okay, that's important. Power reset buttons makes life so much easier instead of taking like a screwdriver and shorting these 2 pins out to start the system. And I believe those are the 2 right pins that short out on this board. So these 2. And then right next to it you have 4 headers here, okay? One is a cold boot header, which is also abbreviated LN2 header for liquid nitrogen. The other one is a slow boot header. So that's to enable booting slowly. The other one is a safe boot header. So slow boot, I guess, engages all types of training and stuff. So it boots really slowly, doesn't skip post at all. And the slow must, that's a slow. And the safe boot will just restore defaults and boot those. And then I believe there's a clear CMOS header as well. And a chassis header here. And then the speakers and the front panel here, another addressable RGB header here. And these are your voltage read points here. So that's pretty cool little OC area right here. So you have all that, and yeah, cool. And let's take a look at some other stuff. Okay, SATA. This might be of interest to some of you. The normal chipset does output a bunch of SATA, okay? And that's not a big issue. Now the thing is here, these 4 ports, the 2 plus 2, those are basically from the chipset, okay? Now that, you can RAID these, okay? They're all SATA 6 gigabits per second, but you can only RAID these 4. These 2 down here are SATA 6 gigabits per second, but they're from like an ASM like 1061 or something. I'll double check that, but they're from AS Media Controller, because I mean all the chipset PCIe is being used for other stuff, so lower end stuff can just be routed to like a little controller and do that instead. Because remember, the chipset is providing bandwidth for these 3, okay? And that's 12 PCIe 4.0 lanes, which is a lot to begin with. And yeah, AMD has a lot going on, but still. Okay, anyways, 2 USB 3.0, and their internal headers, and they're right angled, which is very common on MSI boards. I think they use a hub for these too. I'm not sure, I gotta double check. But these, they're right angled. That's actually a more expensive physical part, but MSI has been doing that for a while, and it's really nice. But keep this in mind, this is a long case. Not a long case, this is a long board. This is more like EATX territory when you're going width. So make sure your case is good with that, or get a right angled one, or whatever you're gonna do. But these are right angled, and they're really useful because most cases still are not all Type C. Anyways, not all Type C internal headers are created equal. This one is from the chipset. This is your third USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 header, this one. This is also your 60 amp header, or 60 watt header, okay? If you plug this in, power in this extra PCIe power connector, it enhances the power capabilities of the motherboard on the PCIe slots, but it also increases power enough for this. So by default, I believe the Type C headers, they can output like at maximum 24 watts, but this one can do 64, or 60, okay? This one is just by default a USB 3.2 Gen 2 internal Type C header. I didn't see anything in the specifications about this being 60 watts also, but just this one is 60 watts, it seems. Yeah, so moving on, we have this, which is nice.
it's our PCIe 5.0 by 4 M.2. Here you have the postcode display, and right above it you have boot stuff. So this is more broad spectrum. The hard part about these like boot LEDs is you can't really tell like which one is lit because they're so bright in a dark case that you can just see the color. So you need the manual out to actually like figure it out, or you could just memorize what it is, and you know. But yeah, the postcode display's here. It's white. It looks pretty cool. Instead of red, the white looks better. It's like white with a little blue hue. Anyways, moving on. Fan headers. So this is a pump header. This is a CPU header. These are two system fan headers. So remember, system fan by default DC mode and 2 amps. Pump header by default PWM mode and 3 amps. System fan header auto detects 3 amps. All of them can switch modes, but you can't switch the amperage rating. But also, you really shouldn't be pulling 3 amps from a header. So, well, I guess you could if you had a really nice pump, but then those usually come with SATA power connectors or some Molex or something. Anyways, so I'm just talking. So we have two PCIe, two ESP 12V connectors for the CPU power. And then remember I mentioned that there was a this SM bus connector on that M.2 card. Well, on the M.2 that expands basically to provide 2 extra PCIe 5.0 slots. Well, that the wire that goes into that card plugs in here. Okay, so that's the overview of the motherboard, and the next step is to basically, you know, tear it down.